Did you know that more people now get their news online than from any other source? MaineWebNews.com covers the current events forming the trends of tomorrow. Experience the future of Maine news today at MaineWebNews.com.
He became chairman of the Forest Health Group within the National Council for the Paper Industry for Air and Stream Improvement. Dr. Coffman is currently president of Environmental Perspectives, EPI, and he is CEO of Sovereignty International, which is a 501c3 organization which focuses on international affairs. In both responsibilities, he analyzes global and national issues such as global warming, private property rights, and government regulations that can potentially cause a loss of liberty, economic stability, and national sovereignty. I am very proud to have him address us tonight, and I think we should all take notes because he is a lover of the truth. Dr. Michael Coffman.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm enjoying coming down here, even though it was in a snowstorm. At least it wasn't too bad. I know there were several people that were going to be coming down from up north of me, but I think they probably elected not to under the circumstances, and I certainly would agree with them. I appreciate your time in coming out in not too good of weather. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not that good either. Actually, when I was teaching at Michigan Technological Universities in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we have 350 to 380 inches of snow a year, lake effect snow primarily. So what you're seeing today would be a good day. It wasn't that difficult for us to drive down. I actually was working again for the paper industry, leading a multi-million-dollar research effort in the 1990s on global warming and acid rain. That's how I got involved in this. After doing this for several years and cooperating with the U.S. government, they were spending millions of dollars a year as well on research dealing with acid rain and global climate change at the time in the late 1980s. The Clean Air Act was reauthorized in 1991. We actually had a very extensive publication that came out prior to the reauthorization explaining exactly what was found and what the situation was as far as our air quality was concerned after 10 years worth of research, and it was just totally ignored, absolutely totally ignored in the reauthorization process. It was at that time that I realized, you know, we could be doing the best science ever dreamed of by man, and it wasn't going to make a hill of beans worth of difference because there was an agenda out there. So I had to find out what that agenda was. And I started to investigate. It didn't take me long. You don't have to dig very deep. Before I realized that there was a major effort going on in the world to achieve what they at that time called world government, but they now call global governance. And they were attempting to try to get justification using a variety of issues like global warming and like biodiversity destruction and so forth to justify the need for having an overarching regulatory system for the entire world. I was able to stop an international treaty in 1994, the Convention on Biological Diversity. I have some of the maps back there if you're interested. I used that on the Senate floor just the day before, an hour before the treaty was to be ratified, and basically it just brought the whole process to a standstill because that is exactly what they intended to do with this treaty, is to really lock up half of the land area in the United States into wilderness. That was the long-term outcome of that treaty, and once the senators saw that, Senator Mitchell, who was the majority leader at the time, our senator, who was a Democrat, was so shocked because I talked to him several times before that personally, that he withdrew it from the Senate calendar. It was never even brought out on the Senate floor. It was stopped an hour beforehand because it was such a radical treaty. Most of the things coming out of the United Nations are fairly radical, at least to the average American. If you begin to really investigate what's going on, you'll find that there is very close linkage between the U.S. government and the United Nations. Now, I've read several articles here in the last couple of weeks talking about this vast conspiracy of the United Nations forcing Agenda 21 down, and it's called the Gateway 1 project. That's why you're all here tonight. There is some truth in there, but not a whole lot of truth. And I want to say that right now. I've had a chance to scan all of Gateway 1, and I've had a chance to read some of it very closely. And I'll be honest with you, of all of these kinds of activities I've seen across the country, and I've seen a lot of them, I'll have to congratulate Maine for doing and trying to protect the rights of the citizens the more than in almost any other state that I've ever looked at. I'm very encouraged. However, the seeds are there that could lead into corruption. And I'm going to explain tonight a number of things. I'm going to be talking about Agenda 21 and environmentalism. You have to know where environmentalism is coming from to understand what is happening here today. You also have to know what Agenda 21 is all about and how it was introduced into this country and is now the mainstay policy of the U.S. government. But I'll be explaining that. The smart growth fraud. I'll be talking about that just a little. I got a lot more on that, but we just don't have the time right now. But I'll be giving you some information on that and how it is misleading and very, very expensive. Talking about the war of worldviews. In fact, that's what I'm going to start with. No, it's not. Unless you understand the Constitution, and that's what this is about here tonight, unless you really begin to understand the Constitution and why it was created and written the way it was, there will be nothing wrong with Agenda 21 or the Gateway 1 project. In fact, I was really hoping to have quite a few people here tonight from the Gateway 1 project. These people tried to do their very best in writing up this document and planning out for the future. I want to show you some of the traps that you can get into as a group of towns and so forth, and things that you need to stay away from because they're insidious. They don't sound bad, but unless you understand why the founding fathers wrote the Constitution the way they did, it'll go right over your heads. Okay, first of all, talking about Agenda 21 and environmentalism, talking about the environmental agenda and what is known as the IUCN. How many here have heard of the IUCN? Oh, 8 or 10. I will assure you right now that it's in your backyard and you don't even know it. That's how quiet all of this stuff has been. Agenda 21, biodiversity. I mentioned biodiversity. I mentioned a little bit about global warming. We're not going to be talking about those tonight. We just don't have the time. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN. Just what is it? It originated the concept of sustainable development. How many have heard of sustainable development? Almost everyone. If I asked that same question 10 years ago, you might have had one or two hands raised.
How about 2 months ago?
Or it could be even 2 months ago in some cases. The fact is, the IUCN was responsible for coining the concept of sustainable development, which was then made the mainstay of Agenda 21, and we'll be talking about momentarily. Ecosystem management, where you look at ecosystems to manage rather than just plots of ground. That's from a scientific standpoint, there's nothing wrong with this. It provides a mechanism to make an evaluation of what is necessary, how to manage that particular piece of land based on the ecological requirements of that land. If it's used in that way, it's great. If it's used as an absolute concrete thing that you must do to duplicate nature, it will go astray and lead you down a primrose path. It's based, believe it or not, in what they call eco-spiritualism. Now, what is eco-spiritualism? Sounds rather ominous. Let's look a little bit more at their purpose: to promote alternative models for sustainable communities and lifestyles based in eco-spiritual practices and principles to accelerate our transition to a just and sustainable future. Humanity must undergo a radical change in its attitudes, values, and behavior. In response to this situation, a new global ethic is taking form and is finding its expression in international law. Who's writing this international law? The IUCN. That's then taken to the United Nations. There are a couple other international organizations that are sister organizations, but I'll talk about them in a minute. It's taken to the United Nations, and then they're brought out for ratification to the rest of the country. But it is based in religion, specifically pantheism. Now, they have a right to believe their pantheistic viewpoint, just as we have a right to believe in whatever we believe. But what they're doing is they're taking their doctrine and forcing it into international and national law without us knowing it, and then forcing us to obey their particular doctrine. That is what's bad about this particular issue. And it's all coming through the IUCN. Now, what does it mean? Now, this is done by Stephen Rockefeller. Now, who is Stephen Rockefeller? He was the son of Nelson Rockefeller. I'm not going to go into him too much, other than to say that he is about as new age as you can possibly get. And he is the actual brains behind sustainable development in the IUCN and the United Nations. He's retired now, but at the time he wrote this. Sustainable by definition means not only indefinitely prolonged, but nourishing as the earth is nourishing to life and the self-actualization of persons and communities. The word development need not be restricted to economic activity, but can mean the evolution, unfolding, growth, and fulfillment of any and all aspects of life. Now, you've all heard about sustainable development, some for a couple of years, some just in the last month or two. This is the United Nations definition of sustainable development. They won't publish it this way, but this is what's behind whatever they tell you it is. Thus, sustainable development may be defined as a kind of human activity that nourishes and perpetuates the fulfillment of the whole community of life on Earth. Now, I have other United Nations documents that I'm not going to get into tonight, giving you an example of implemented into global policy is that the document that I introduced to the U.S. Senate to stop the ratification of the Biological Diversity Treaty basically said that lakes, rocks, and rivers are living entities and must be protected. This is where this belief system leads. Now, if we all knew that going in and we elected to do that, that's one thing. But the fact is that it's being brought under the door, as it were, where people literally cannot see it. And it sounds like motherhood and apple pie. I mentioned two other sister organizations. One is the World Resources Institute. One is the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. You've probably heard of at least the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, probably not the World Resources Institute. And of course the IUCN, the one that we've been talking about. What you don't know yet of what is the IUCN? Who are its members? Well, believe it or not, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the ICLEI, I'll be talking about ICLEI later, it's the International Council on Local Environmental Issues. It's a very, very big planning organization. Many of our communities in southern Maine along the coast belong to ICLEI. The Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, National Wildlife Federation, National Audubon, the National Resources Defense Council, the Environmental Defense Fund, and so forth. And United Nations Environmental Program, United Nations Development Program, UNESCO, and so forth. You've heard of those organizations. They actually make up the membership of the IUCN. They meet on a regular basis behind closed doors where the press is not allowed, and they develop their eco-spiritual agenda on you and I. And so what you find in policy formulation is you have the federal agencies on one side, the environmental groups on the other side, coming together to look like this is a broad concept of it's just being accepted by the whole world because it's so great, when in fact it's well designed by a small group of people to force its way into policy formulation in different nations around the world.